Welcome to the Touch MBA Admissions Podcast. Do you need help figuring out which schools to apply to or how to get into the world's top MBA programs? Hey, you're not alone. Join thousands of others on this podcast and on our site, touchmba.com, as they seek the admissions edge. And now, here's your host, Darren Joe.
Okay, welcome friends to the Touch MBA podcast. This is your host, Darren. And today we're going to try something a bit different. We're going to be talking to an actual Insead alumni about his experience and about how he went about picking business schools. Viet Le Quoc attended Insead and is Canadian, but Viet, could you tell us a little bit more about yourself and your background?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. So I'm technically Vietnamese by ethnicity. I was previously a strategy consultant and investment banker before attending business school and worked pretty much in Asia and Europe for most of my time.
Well, first of all, why did you decide to get an MBA?
Well, I think, like a lot of people, you work for a couple of years, then you realize, you want something more. For my friends, I didn't even know what an MBA was really until I got into consulting. And for some people there, it's a requirement to get promoted. For me, it was more because I was in banking. I wanted to, look at other opportunities and take the time off to actually, think about what it is that you really want to do. And I thought the MBA gives you the credibility and the time off to actually, combine that particular path.
And did you know exactly what you wanted to do post MBA?
I already had an idea before I applied for business school, and the MBA itself allowed me to confirm that thought. I was on the sales side and wanted to move into the buy side, and so the MBA allows you to build a network which allows you to get into, hopefully, that field, but also take the course that are needed to fill in the gaps, technically and so forth. So more than ever, I'm pretty sure what I want to do, at least.
And where did you get your undergraduate degree from?
I went to McGill.
Okay, so McGill is a top university in Canada. MBA programs are really big on fit. They want to make sure that they get applications from people who have really investigated different MBA programs and shown that they're the right fit for the culture and the way classes are taught, etc., the whole community. So how did you go about researching MBA programs?
Well, I got very lucky. Being at Bain, obviously most of my superiors were MBA grads, so I had the likes of HBS, Stanford, Kellogg, Inseaders in my team. So I think the first point of contact is if you know friends who have gone to B school, you should talk to them, just to see how the culture is like. And obviously, based on your interactions with your friends, you should have a very good idea of what you could expect there. And then obviously, I think second step is go onto the school's website, just to look at the curriculum first to see if it makes sense for you. Then you have a very good idea. And then third, if you can actually go for, a school visit, that would be actually quite helpful. That's how I've done it.
And I think that's the most interesting answer, because most people check the website first. But your advice is talk to people first. Talk to alumni, talk to students. And I definitely encourage people to do that on this podcast. But what questions are you asking them?
When I wanted to apply to business school, I think the first question I asked all my friends was like, did you enjoy it? And then second is, was it that helpful? A lot of people won't see the benefits of going to business school at least the first 2-3 years post-graduation, because that's when you really have to work hard and things are not necessarily that easy to find a job within the current market. But I think, all of them were adamant. They were saying, you will not see the benefits right away, but it will take a few years. But in the meantime, they enjoyed it. They enjoyed making a lot of friends that actually are friends for life. That's true, because during business school, you hang out with the same people for like 10 months to 24 months, depending where you go, and you build real bonds. And it's not so much about what you're going to learn in the textbook, but it's about the experience you're going to have with other people. And so that question is important to me, was, did you enjoy it? Because obviously, I don't think a lot of people will tell you that they didn't enjoy it, but you can tell. If they're your friends, they'll tell you, hey, it was great, but maybe in hindsight, they would have chosen another school.
Right.
That's something that it is better. If you go to this, let's say a school visit, of course they're going to try to sell you their school, and rightfully so.
Yeah.
But your friends should have your best interest and are the people and they'll give you an objective view. They might say, yes, business school is a good decision, but based on X, Y, Z, I think you're more fit for Stanford or any other school. I have no idea which school that is.
So basically, you're trying to suss out how excited people were to have gone to that school.
And truth be told, I could ask them, do you have good career prospects? If you go to a top 10 business school, chances are you'll land a very good job. And of course, some schools have it better than others. Like if you want to do private equity, it's relatively easier if you go to Harvard Business School. But it doesn't mean you can't get in if you go to Wharton, Stanford, Insead. It's different. You have to spin it a different way. But if you're in the top 10 school, you'll have good prospects. So on that end, I wasn't too worried. It was more about the experience. Is the investment worth the time and the money, right? And what type of people, what type of experience you can expect. That was the most important factor for me.
And you said that some of your colleagues said you won't see the benefits until it's 3 years down the road. I mean, what are those benefits that they mentioned?
So for a lot of them, because they were already consultants at top firms or investment bankers, there is not much of a, let's say, big gain to go to business school. It's just like a check mark, to be honest. But the network, really, gets, full benefits 5 years down the road, because by then your colleagues, your classmates are much more experienced and much more established. But I think for someone who didn't go to consulting or investment banking, and I'm not saying that these two fields are the most, it's not for everybody, but let's say if you're not from these fields, the MBA makes perfect sense because it allows you to reset the clock on whatever you've done before and then get something else. And a lot of my classmates at Insead told me they went to Insead or business school just because they wanted to, change careers, which is, I think the majority of business school students. And a lot of them, it's not that they didn't have the credentials to apply to all these consulting firms or investment banking firms, because ultimately that's what they want to do. But it's difficult to break into, these fields if you had, let's say, 5 years in marketing before. Right. You probably have the smarts and all that's required to do the job. But these firms are really stringent on the requirements, which usually goes through the B school, case. And if you have that little check mark, then you're brand new for them and you're a perfect fit.
It's really good stuff. And so what was your short list of schools that you were looking at?
For my part, because I've lived in Europe, North America, and the whole Asia for quite some time, I want something international, but also something reputable. So to me, I know it sounds very arrogant, but I want a top 10 school, and ideally a top 5 school. I actually looked at the ones I would really want to go into, so the Harvard of the world and so forth. And my shortlist was HBS, Stanford, Wharton, Kellogg, and Insead. So I applied to all of these schools, and obviously the application is pretty long and requires a lot of work, to be honest. But it also helps you to actually learn more about yourself. It sounds a lot wishy-washy, but it's true. Each of these schools have a process, and I think the process itself, whether you get it or not, helps you learn more about yourself. There are some schools that are really good at selecting their students in terms of career prospects. Like if you're an entrepreneur, I think going to Stanford is the right fit, but going to Wharton might not be necessarily the right option, and the application helps you to weed that out. Let's face it, I think the top choice for a lot of students is Harvard, but in hindsight, I don't think it would have been the right choice to go had I got admitted.
So how do you decide? These are such great caliber schools. What made you eventually decide to pick Insead versus all the others?
Well, to be honest, I think you really go where you have an offer. Ideally, in the best state of the world, you have an offer at different schools. And in that case, which was my case, I think you really have to, sit down and think, what is it that you really want to do? What do you want to get out of business school? For me, I want something short. I want to stay in Asia. Insead being 10 months is great. It has a full-time campus in Singapore. Network is huge in Asia. And also because I didn't want to spend 2 years, seemed to be the right option. And sure, you could argue that Insead is not as established as Stanford, but then again, Insead has been around for like 50 years max. So that's that's something to take into consideration. But to me, it was really about what it is that I want to do. I knew I wanted to network and take the time off, but not something too long. And Insead seemed to be the perfect match.
Could you give any advice into how applicants can write really great essays for the schools they're applying to? I'm sure you spend a lot of time crafting those.
So I think let's look at the external factors first. You need to have a good group of friends or reviewers, because it's a teamwork really. It's about yourself, but it's teamwork. Your friends should be there to review and give you the plain truth about your essays. Like when they read your essays, the first question you should ask them is, does it sound like yourself? I mean, because if you try to lie and massage things, the admissions committee at all these schools are trained to cut through bullshit. And so that's the first thing you need, a good team of peers or friends, family, just to review your essays. And more intrinsically, I think, when people say, don't try, to sell a story. Well, the only story you need to sell is yourself. I mean, why do you want an MBA? Why now? Why that particular school? And you don't have to say how unique you are, because obviously, there's 6 billion people in this world. Everyone's unique if you just look at the pure sense of the meaning. It's about why are you who you are based on your life experience. It's nothing more than that. And for my part, when I've done the essays, I found it was really difficult because you think you know your story, but writing it down in maybe 600 words is much more difficult than you think.
Yeah.
Of course, try to make things that make you stand out. But normally, if you're true and honest about what you wrote, you'll stand out regardless. You don't have to say, oh, but I don't think my life story is unique or anything. You don't have to make up things. Just write what you think is a good reflection of your application and the type of person you are. That's the only thing the admissions officers want to know and want to read. And based on that's how you get in. I mean, that's how you get at least invited for the interview.
Which friends did you approach to help read your essays? Was it friends that already had MBAs or friends without MBAs?
So I used a mix of both, although more skewed towards, my friends or supervisors who have an MBA. Ideally, you have people who come from the schools you apply to. I know from my Harvard application, one of my recommenders actually, for conflict of interest, she didn't want to read my essays, but she referred me to someone else in the team who's from HBS and reviewed my essays. I also have friends from there who helped me review my application. For Insead, I tapped into my network of Inseaders and so on and so forth for the schools. But also I asked people who do not have an MBA to review, like some of my supervisors at JP Morgan who are much more senior, and asked them, so when you read my essays, does it sound like me? And would you want to meet me for interviews? And they give you a totally brand new perspective because they have not gone through the business school process. They can really say yes or no. Whereas the business school reviewers definitely add a lot of value to what you're going to write, but they can also have to tailor based on what they think is right for the committee to like the check marks that they're looking for.
It's really good advice. And what about recommendations? Any tips there in terms of who you should approach? Should you approach someone that has gone to the school? Is that critical?
I think there's a mixed feeling about that. I personally believe that it doesn't hurt if you have a recommendation coming from an alum, but only if that person can testify to your capacity as a supervisor. Like if they never supervise you and never work with you, I think it's not worth much. Ideally, your recommendation comes from someone who has worked with you, is from that particular school, and is fairly senior, right? That would be in the best thing in the world. But then nothing is ever perfect. Yeah. So I truly believe it doesn't really matter who you really ask, as long as that person really work with you and can really, pinpoint your strength and your weaknesses. We all have strengths, we all have weaknesses, and I think the admissions committee is aware of that. They're cognizant that, if you go to business school, there are some gaps you need to fill, and no one's perfect, right? So if your recommendation makes you sound like you're the superstar, then, something's probably off. I would say that person has to be honest, but of course, vouch for you and then promote you to the school.
Right. So what you're saying is that, like, the authenticity of your application has to really ring through, and to pick recommenders who know your workplace strengths and weaknesses very well. That's the most important thing. I know for Stanford for sure, one of the forms that they send to the person you ask for recommendation, it asks them to rank the candidate based on different dimensions and give a grade. Would they really recommend this candidate to the school? It goes from, I think, from not all to top 2%,
exactly,
top 5%, top 10%.
Yeah. And then based on the letter that they will write, the admissions committee know whether or not that person has worked with you. So be honest. And the last thing you want is just to have a recommendation that's made up. Right. Really.
And so you applied to 5 schools. Did you ask your boss to write 5 different recommendations, or were you, because I think a lot of candidates would feel bad asking their boss for, 5, 8, recommendations, business school recommendations? Did you mix it up, or how did that work?
So to be honest, there is one person, my mentor, who wrote a recommendation for all the 5 schools.
Great. Yeah.
Herself, she is a Harvard Business School graduate. Obviously, she would have preferred me to go to HBS, but she was very happy to write all the 5 letters. I think end of the day, you need to find people who want you to succeed.
Yeah.
And these people usually happen to be the ones you ask for recommendations. Of course, it's a big stretch if you ask them to write 10 letters, but you shouldn't be concerned to tap, the same people if you think they're the best ones to vouch for you and promote you.
Right.
And I think it's not a big stretch for them to help you out.
Cool. So a lot of good advice there on the admissions process. Now let's talk a little bit more about your Insead MBA experience.
Sure.
All right. You just graduated, is that right?
That's right. So Insead has 2 intakes. The class that graduates in July, and another one which graduates in December.
Well, I really want to ask you a lot about recruiting questions and how
Sure.
those different timelines could affect that. But let's first talk about just what was the best part about going to Insead? What were you most thrilled about?
And this is more of a really subjective point of a personal opinion, I would say. To me, what really got me excited when I got in, and of course, I had to do a thorough and long reflection on which school to pick, but I chose Insead just because a lot of my very good friends who are long-time alums now are from Insead, and I really recognize myself within them. But I was excited about, obviously, you have the opportunity to study in France. I mean, it's not Paris, it's Fontainebleau. I mean, it's debatable how far it is from Paris. And at the same time, you can also spend time in Singapore. So you have a foot in Asia and Europe at the same time. And Insead has a 3rd campus in Abu Dhabi.
Yeah.
So you have that option. But if you also want to spend time in the US, there are exchange, partnerships with Northwestern Kellogg and University of Pennsylvania Wharton. So it's by far the most international school I've seen. And that's really what attracted me, just because I was raised in an international upbringing. So I wanted something, not too far from home, so to speak. So I was really excited about that, and of course, as a student, I think the student life itself is amazing. Every week you have activities. Granted, I could have participated more in student life than what I've done during my year, but I think you meet amazing people from different paths and routes of life, and the travel. When you're in Singapore or even in Fontainebleau, every weekend you can visit a different city. I know my friends in Fontainebleau. Every weekend they go to London, they go to Prague, Berlin, Ibiza, and so forth. I'm a Singapore lifer, so I spend the whole program in Singapore. Okay. I was traveling every weekend to Vietnam, Taiwan, Korea, Japan, and so forth, which brought a lot into the experience.
And how do you have time to travel like that in a 10-month program?
So
how does that work?
I'll be very honest, and once you're in a top business school, there's a reason why we have non-grade disclosure. And I think the official reason is that you need to challenge yourself by taking courses that you would not have really taken. And that's true. People really take courses out of interest and not because, it's for free grades. And I've taken courses that I would have never thought I'd be interested in. And if you're not really interested in a course, chances are you're not going to perform well. So I think that's the first reason. But it's also for students to enjoy a bit. You've worked hard to get into business school, and I think people are cognizant that you need to cool down a little bit, cool off, blow some steam, and then that's part of the reason. There are people who fail, so if you do the minimum required, you'll be fine, right? But how do you find time? I mean, it's about managing your time. I mean, it's a bit like when you apply for full-time jobs or when you have very tight deadlines at work. It's you have to find your priorities and finish what's important first. And if the grade is too much work and your team cannot help you out, don't travel. It really comes down to that.
Yeah. I mean, you have a very international background, as you mentioned, and Insead really prides itself on the diversity of nationalities represented in one class. Yeah. Over 90 nationalities, and that no one nationality represents more than 10% of the class. And they talk about how you work in teams and everyone is from a different country. So did you ever encounter any difficulties working with your team because they were from such different backgrounds, whether geographically or functionally or industry-wise?
Right. That is actually a very interesting question. I think at least at Insead, so for the first 4 months, what we call in the first 2 periods, you get assigned a study team. So for the core courses. In my case, I had a Filipino guy, a Liechtensteiner, an Indian girl, and a Russian girl as well. So needless to say that first, no common nationalities, and they also choose not only nationalities, but type of jobs you had. So I was the banker. The Liechtensteiner was a consultant. And then, while the Indian girl used to work in oil and gas, then had a marketing person, a Russian girl. And so the Filipino guy, actually, very interesting background, professional singer, won the best composing title in Philippines before coming to Insead, and worked in marketing and corporate finance. So all these countries have nothing alike. And sure, I'm Vietnamese, so I should feel closer to the Filipino classmate, but because we've lived in different places of the globe and we've done different jobs, first we bring the cultural aspects in, and the job, let's say the job culture as well. And Insead chooses your teams in order for you to encounter cultural clash.
You can't choose your teams, right?
You don't, at least for 4 months. So you're bound to find cultural clash and interpersonal clash. And the reason to do that, I think, is, and we know, we're not out on fresh on the undergrad anymore, and with more hindsight, it's because you don't get to choose who you work with. And no matter what happens, you have team deliverables. You just have to make things work, regardless of whether or not you can get along well or not with your teammates. To be fair, I was the first one to judge some of my teammates, and I was utterly wrong. Yeah. And some of them became some of my best friends. I mean, I get along very well with my teams, but I grew very close, particularly to my Filipino classmate and the Liechtensteiner. And I love the two girls in my team as well.
Yeah.
But you're bound to have surprises. I think you just have to be open-minded about what you're going to encounter, and know that you're going to encounter clash. The question is, how do you go about overcoming that? I'm not saying you're going to be best friends. In my case, it sounds like a Disney story, and things got very, very happy. But I know some teams who clashed right away, and one teammate had to take on more work because 2 of them just couldn't hack each other.
So you have this intimate team experience with people from all over the world, but Insead is a really big MBA program. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of its good parts and bad parts, is that it's huge, and it's 1 year, and there's so many people coming in and out of the school. Were you able to meet a lot of your classmates and get to know a lot of your classmates, or was that really hard to do because there's 400 people in your class?
Well, I think there's an objective and subjective component to this question. Objectively, I think yes, it's a big program, and you have 2 overlapping classes, the December and July classes, and each intake is around 500 students. And to add to the complexity of that 500 students, you add the geographical split. Yeah. 250 students in Fontainebleau, 250 students in Singapore. The ones who start in the same campus usually will know 60 to 80% of them. Now, the question really is, how well do you want to know people? That's where the subjectivity comes in. Personally, I was, I just wanted to focus on my job search and the field I wanted to get in. Yeah. Finance usually recruits very early on, so I was unfortunately able to attend all the social activities just because, the first couple of months, that's where you meet people, that's where you bond. So I chose, my group very, unfortunately, just by force, just because, these were the only people who could hang out at the days, I was really available. But no, you can actually meet a lot of people if you're willing, to sacrifice a bit of your study time to just meet the folks. And on the opening day, actually, we at least in Singapore campus, we had the head of one of the heads from Goldman Sachs who said, "You might not remember it, or you might not make a lot of sense out of it, but if you have to choose between the party and the schoolwork, there is no doubt you choose the party."
And all the Insead administrators are cringing in the background.
And a lot of the students actually laughed about it, but that's what they all chose, the party. And I think, sure, I mean, we're I think at Insead we're cognizant and we recognize the fact that we have a party, reputation, but that is true of any business school. And it's a bit like play hard, and of course play hard, but you have to work hard. I think I've been amazed at how hard my fellow Inseaders have been studying. when we had projects or when we had exams. They take things very seriously, and they have every right to do it. You pay 60,000 euros, to make a change in your career and your life. Right. So it's only fair that you put in the effort.
So it's really all about trade-offs and priorities.
And that's why they talk about fear of missing out. There are so many things you could do.
FOMO, right?
Yeah, FOMO. There are so many things you could do in any business school, and particularly in Insead. Programs so short. There are so many people you like to talk to, and then we all know each other by reputation and all that. And I just encourage anyone who go to business school in Insead. Sure, you're gonna hear things about people, good or bad. Just make the effort to meet them, and then make your own opinion. And you'll be surprised how much your opinion might change. Usually in a good way, just because you get to know people. And it's about priorities. What do you value most? There's only 24 hours in a day, and that's a big, rich comment coming from me, knowing I'm a former banker. But you gotta do what's right with your priorities. If your priority is to build a big network, know a lot of people, then you know what? Just attend everything. But then you'll see that there's a lot of trade-off.
What was the best class or you felt you took at Insead? Or what professor really inspired you?
So there's not really one best classes, but there are, let's say, 3 areas that I really enjoyed. And the first one is finance, obviously. I think Insead is known to be a consulting school, but not because I'm an alum now, but I think Insead is underestimated for its finance capabilities. I think the finance department has among some of the best professors, and particularly Professor Pierre Lyon, French guy, and he teaches his finance class with passion, really with passion. He knows his stuff. And
which class is that?
Well, the core classes for finance and all the specialization classes, such as hedge fund, project finance, derivatives, options, and so forth. His classes are difficult; they'll push you hard. But he does it with passion, and he will take the extra time to teach you stuff, reply your emails, even at 2 a.m. Right. I remember I asked him a question about real estate finance, which is unfortunately a class not taught at Insead, but he took time to pinpoint me in the right directions. So I found that really, really nice of him. There's another area, which is organizational behavior. It's probably one of the most meaningful classes I've taken. You realize that the technical skills you can learn in the book, so you can learn on the job. But how do you convince a team of leaders or a team of people who do not have the same objectives as you do? How do you convince them to do what it is that you think should be right, or how to take the project forward? That's what organizational behavior at least makes you self-aware of. The class doesn't teach you how to do things, obviously, but at least to be self-aware of what you're doing and how you're being perceived, because end of the day, and no matter whether it's in a professional setting or personal life, you have perceptions and so forth, and you need to manage that to move ahead or move forward at least. And then the third one is a class called Career Dynamics and Self-Assessment. It sounds very soft, and it is a soft class, but it's about if there is one time that you have the opportunity to self-reflect about the choices you've made and why you're making the choices you made, or you made them, it's that class. But it assumes that you're willing to question yourself. I'm not saying it's an easy thing to do, but if you know what you're getting into, in a safe setting, safe environment, you talk about really personal things, and you realize the personal things that have happened to you command the choices you make professionally and personally, and that gives you a new, let's say, light on why you are where you are.
Really interesting stuff. So let's talk a little bit about the recruiting at Insead. Sure. So you mentioned that there's 2 classes, they come out in July and December.
Yeah.
Right? So if you come out in July, you're starting in
August. And you don't have a summer internship.
Right. So could you just talk to our audience about the difference in those 2 intakes and what candidates should look out for?
Sure. So I think first, I know there's a lot of debate when you go in GMAT club forums and all that about which class is easier to get into or which campus. To be very honest, and it's official and it's the truth, whether you want to apply to the French or Singapore campus, same admissions criteria, it's centralized in France anyways. Whether you apply for the July, December classes, same criteria. So there's nothing to play the game. Apply where you think you want to be and when the time is right for you. Now, there are obviously pros and cons to each class, each intake. I think the pro of the July intake, the gap usually normally between the time you get in and you start, there's really none, because there's summer and you can even take time off to travel, which is true of the December class as well. But it's a very short program. You start in August and you finish in July. So normally by August you're already in a new job. Big con, you should know right away what you want to do, because recruiting starts, I think, literally a couple of weeks in. I think you start end of August, and some recruiters already start in mid to late September, particularly banking. So if you know you want to do banking, you better know really quick. And the problem with investment banking particularly, you don't apply for full-time positions. You apply for a summer internship. And because the July intake doesn't have a summer internship, you're going to be a summer intern even post-graduation.
Right.
So that's a con, depending on how you see it.
Yeah.
And even that, you have access to the same other jobs that the December intake will have. So the full-time consulting recruiting kicks in, I think, in February, March. So that's fine. That's why if you're unsure of what you want to do, I would say take the December intake. Start later, and then you'll have the benefit. Start in January and finish in December. You'll have the benefit of a 10 weeks internship in the summer, which allows you to intern in banking, intern in consulting, or intern in something else and make up your mind. Whereas if you take the July class and if you're still unsure what you want to do, even after 6 months, it might be a bit difficult to find a job. You'll find a job, of course, but it might just be more difficult to take part of the on-campus recruiting activities.
So for career switchers, you would recommend January intake?
That's right. Unless you want to do consulting, and then either class is fine.
Right. But then, so why did you decide to start in July then? Because you want to be in banking, right? So it makes it a bit tougher for you, right? But
I'm already from a banking background, so to me it was just I would continue in the same path, except whether sell side or buy side, in the same timeline. So I knew right away. So to me, it really didn't make a difference, to be honest.
Right. Because you had that same background and you wanted to get in the same industry, more or less. Does Insead bring a lot of companies to campus, or do you have to really go out and meet these companies?
I know many of my classmates, if they hear this podcast, they will probably smile at your question and my answer. And I'll give you the truth. I mean, I think career services is doing the best they can. Companies are coming on campus, and maybe because my year we're still in the middle of a recession, not as many companies. Let's rephrase. There are companies coming, but it's not pre-07, right? So banking-wise, it's not as great as back in the days, obviously. Yeah. But you'll have access to the same top consulting companies, and a lot of students, whether Insead or any other B school, will go to B school just to have access to consulting firms. So consulting, usually you'll have access to all the firms. Industry-wise, all the top blue chip names you could think of, Johnson & Johnson and all that. So that's absolutely fine. You'll have access to them. But of course, if you have to rely only on career services to find a job, I think that's where there's probably a mismatch. You need, as a business school student, to be proactive. And regardless of whether companies visit the campus, regardless of whether you go to Insead or Harvard Business School, because Harvard has the same issues, you need to make the first step and approach these companies, or the companies you're interested in.
Right. You're going to a great school like Insead, but when you come out, there's 400 of you. There's a lot of people, 400 or 500. So is it tough to stand out with these big companies when you have so many other classmates probably interested in similar work? Well,
I think, as I said, going back to your question about application, the admissions process and committee handpicked all the candidates. And at Insead, everyone's unique, same as Harvard and same as Stanford. So if you really want to stand out, you'll stand out in your own ways, but everyone's unique, everyone has their strengths and weaknesses. I think everyone has its own merits, and everyone's equally qualified to do the job. So if you try, to stand out, that's probably not going to be too good. It's going to be difficult. It's just be honest and just be as motivated as you can when you apply and when you go to interview. Don't try, to just say that, if you've been F-16, fighter pilot, it's great, but you're not going to be hired based on that premise. You're hired on the premises that you're competent. And I believe that everyone entering any of these schools has the skill set to actually, land these jobs. Yeah. So it's not about a matter of standing out. It's about a matter of finding the right company. Of course, put in the effort in the cover letter and when you apply. But when it comes to the interview, is focus on what you're going to bring to the firm. And that goes to the skill set that you're bringing in.
And what about reaching out to Insead alumni?
So
How has that been?
sure. I mean, I think, I'm not gonna lie, and I think it's the case with all the other schools, but most alums are pretty responsive to your emails or phone calls. Not everyone's gonna reply because they're busy with their own lives, but I think the strength of Insead is its network. I mean, we have thousands and thousands of alums spread across the world. And so it's really amazing. I've emailed alums in Latin America, in the US, in Europe, in Southeast Asia, and North Asia, and most of the time they've been pretty responsive. Had coffee chats with them, which in some cases have materialized in job opportunities. So they've been really helpful. They've been through the same process, and there's a big pride to have gone to Insead.
Yeah. Great, Viet. I think this was just a great conversation. Thank you so much for your time.
No problem.
And before we leave, any last words to our audience about applying to Insead or other top business schools?
I would say, if you want international experience and you want a short program that allows you to work in Europe and in Asia, I think Insead's the place to be. If you want to go to Harvard, go to Harvard. If you want to go to Stanford, Wharton, these are all equally fine schools, and they're really good at what they do. Insead has a very unique value proposition. Just think about what's right for you and what is it that you really want to do. That's really the only thing I would have to say.